All right, so what I want to do is change tact a little bit from the discussion we had from Professor Hughes. So increasingly, we talked about the consumption trends. We talked about the foray into meat products and the different innovations that are taking place across the world. What I want to do right now is just move to the production side of things. Professor Hughes mentioned, some might look at it as the risks of growing Muslim population or growing Indian population because the beef and the pork industry was going to be challenged. Maybe that might be the case, but we also have an opportunity because what I'm going to be talking about right now is pretty much leafy and non-leafy vegetables and fruits. So I don't think there's anyone in the world who doesn't consume, veg and fruits. That goes for the Muslims, the Indians, the Chinese, and everyone else. So over the next 20 minutes or so, let me take you through this journey, and start with telling you a little bit of my own story. So many decades ago, when I was a young boy, I would accompany my dad every Monday and Thursday to the farm that we had, which is about 20-30 kilometers away from the city limits in India. And whether it rained or poured, we had 7 acres of land, and we had a coconut farm, and we had mango trees, and we had lots of veggie patches and things. Every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, I would go early in the morning at about 7, water the plants, water the farm, help my dad put in as much fertilizer and whatnot into the ground, try and pump water from the wells, and through that journey, which even though I was exposed to many decades ago, I was never encouraged to go into ag or to go into farming. What I was encouraged to go into was engineering and tech, and so on and so forth, and that's what I did, but never looked back in terms of thinking about ag as a career option. And now we have that same issue across the globe, where if you just look at Asia, 80% of the farms across Asia are smallholder farms. So these are farms that are probably about 2 hectares in lot size. And so a lot of the farmers, what they're going through right now is mainly subsistence farming, which is mainly farming to support themselves, not so much export or even supply to the local supermarkets. And so, while that's the situation in many parts of Asia today, as Professor Hughes alluded to, there is a growing urban middle class. The consumer pattern, the consumption patterns are changing. And how are we keeping up with all these changes? Is technology playing a role? So where we find ourselves today is, which was once out on the farm is now inside a laboratory or a factory or a warehouse. And that's where technology has brought us today. And this is where I'm going to be focusing most of my talk in the next 20 minutes. Now, while this is happening, and I'll give you some insight into where the trends are, where the money's flowing, what the consumption patterns are looking like, and ultimately try and argue my point around the Peel Food Zone being in a very opportunistic place, having that opportunity to tackle over the next few years and the decade. But also just to give you a sense of where might we go in the future. Now, my presentation will focus on leafy, non-leafy vegetables and the fruits. But what about Broadacre Farms? This is a company in Japan that's trying to grow rice inside a building, and while this, is still very much in R&D mode, it's not difficult to think about a future where broadacre farming might start taking place inside buildings, So just keep an open mind to what's happening out there and think about what opportunities we might have and how do we actually capture those opportunities. So over the next 20 minutes, the key aspects I'm going to be focusing on, just to build on Professor Hughes's presentation on what's driving the change, looking at the benefits of these, what we're calling plant factories today, and how they might be relevant to Peel, and looking at what proportion of food is currently coming out of these plant factories. So we might think that there's 100% or even 90% of the farming that's being done traditional in-ground. But what we're actually seeing is today, globally, world over, there's about 20 or 25% of food that's being produced in these plant factories, and that's what we're seeing at our supermarket shelves. And finally, try and make the point as to, how does Peel get involved? What's the opportunity? What's the market potential? All right? So, let me talk about 3 change drivers. The one which Professor Hughes talked about is the changing urbanization, the growing urbanization trend, the growing middle class, and the demand from the consumer is changing. So now we don't only want instant food, we want instant, safe, healthy, quality, organic, nutritious, and everything else in food. So a survey that was done in the US in 2014 or 2015, 30,000 consumers were surveyed, and about 88% of them said that they were willing to pay a high price for premium food, for premium healthy food, okay? This is one company, Kroger, in the US. In the years 2014 to 2015, the health segment of this company's product range grew by about $11 billion in just 1 year. This one product, which they're calling Simple Truth, Professor Hughes talked about the marketing. You've got to tell a story. It's not about just the product. It's about what the story is. This one product itself, year on year, is tracking $1 billion and over. Okay? From 2009 to 2015, research has shown that carbonated beverages, the top 25 US companies, lost about $18 billion to this health segment. So the consumer is becoming more health conscious. Okay? Now, when you think about from a global perspective, what's the biggest challenge we're facing on the social scale? It is to an extent poverty, but is it hunger any longer? Is it malnutrition? If you actually look at the data and the stats, it's not malnutrition, it's obesity. We've got 1 billion people who are categorized as being obese, and we have about 600 or 700 individuals who are malnourished. So, probably about 5 or 10 years ago, the sorts of equations we were talking about were quite reversed, where we had malnourishment as a huge challenge. But today, it's different, and it's a growing problem, which is why you're seeing the urban middle class, which, it has a growing capacity of spending money, is looking at spending its money on these type of products. Okay? So, trend number 2. Talk about AgTech. So the picture I showed you earlier, where the pink picture of products coming out from the lab, from the factories. So a lot of them have different forms. They either called vertical farms, they call indoor farms. Part of it looks at controlled environment agriculture, where you're controlling humidity, you're controlling for temperature, you're controlling for air quality, you're controlling for a lot of aspects. And this is, the manifesto from the Association of Vertical Farming, which is a global association. Now, when you just look at this information put out here, they say traditional farming, you're putting in about $5.2 billion, 5.2 billion pounds of pesticides into traditional in-ground farming. In vertical farming, you can achieve the same production capacity at probably 0% pesticides. You talk about the soil, you're using 80% of the soil is in use. Using hydroponics, aquaponics, aeroponics, you can use 0% soil and still produce a large amount of production. The amount of global miles, if you look at the carbon footprint, the environment equation of vertical farming, traditional farming, you still have to transport your produce to, whether it's the distribution warehouse or it's to the consumption end, you're going to be spending a lot of effort and resources. But vertical farming, you can literally have them in the center of the city if you have capacity, and the miles that products travel is much less. Now this is this is the ideal world. Okay, this is where they're coming from. So let's look at what some of the research is saying. So if you look at the production benefits, okay, let's just look at the middle of the table. Just look at tomatoes, pepper, and strawberry. So this is the yield in vertical farming, tons per hectare, compared to what you would produce in a traditional farm. And look at the factor increase due to technology. So if you look at tomatoes, a 3.4 factor increase, peppers, capsicum, 4.4 factor increase, strawberries, 2.3 factor increase, all by virtue of using vertical farms. Okay? So just look at the tonnage produced per hectare. If you look at strawberries, the growth is almost double, clearly, from 30 tons per hectare to 69. You look at tomatoes, from 45 to 155. Okay? Now, if you look at tomatoes, over the last few years, 40% of tomatoes grown world over come from urban farms. They're not coming from your in-ground traditional farms. Okay? So that's another trend that's picking up. So if these are the sorts of trends, if urban farming is really, people think it might be the panacea, maybe not. let's see who's putting their money to some of these change drivers. Let's look at where the money is flowing. So if you look at the technology side, we look at it from farm to fork. Okay, so we classify the technologies at the farming end. We look at ag biotech. You look at the farm management software. You look at the novel farming systems around urban farms. You look at robotics, mechanization. At the fork end, we look at the supply chain technologies. We look at the food apps. We look at all of that. Okay, so where's the money going? This is a chart of the money that has found startup companies over the last 5 or 6 years. And these are only startup companies. These are not the multinationals that are investing in urban farming. Okay? So what you see over here is in 2010, there was about $400 million that found startups. Okay? New tech ventures, new ideas, new apps. Fast forward to 2014, 2015, $4.6 billion of investor capital. Okay? These are your venture capitals in China. These are your JP Morgans, your McKinseys, private investors investing $4.6 billion going into these ag tech opportunities. Last year, 2016, there was a bit of a pullback, $3.2 billion still. Okay? So some of you might look at it and say, well, you know, it's peaked and now it's on the decline. So let me tell you where the decline is and where the opportunities are. I know some of you probably not going to be able to read all of this, but let me take you through some of this. So the pullback in investment was mainly in the food apps. Okay, so these are food apps where you got Uber Eats or you got Deliveroo or Food Panda or whatever other food apps trying to get your produce from the producer to the consumer. Those are the food apps. That's the food app universe. Pullback in terms of investment in that particular category. Still clocking in over $1 billion in investment. Okay, which are the other areas that are growing? Ag biotech. So this is looking at farming inputs, looking at genetics, animal genetics, breeding, and so on and so forth. 150% increase to $750 million. Okay, 719 million new investment capital finding its way to these startups. You look at the novel farming systems, the indoor farms, the urban farms, the new innovative products. 63% increase in terms of investment capital going into these opportunities. Supply chain technology is still seeing a little uptick with 3%, 180 million. And this is only, I repeat, this is only the investment that's being seen at the startup level. So these are new companies starting up. Okay, this data doesn't capture your multinational investments into their own facilities. Okay, so the likes of Sony, Panasonic, and the others, which I'll talk to in a minute as well. So who's getting the money? Outside the US, the top 20 non-US deals are going to China, India, Canada, as Professor Hughes alluded to, and France. Australia still doesn't feature on there. Okay? The company that got the $200 million in 2016 was a Chinese company. Again, as Professor Hughes alluded to, the Chinese consumer is becoming very conscious of where its food is coming from, so fresh food. So this company, Yiguo, basically does that. Gets you the farm fresh products from wherever in the world to your doorstep. So they managed to get $200 million backed by Alibaba and a couple of other companies. Professor Hughes talked about insects for animal and human consumption. A French company managed to attract about $500 million in investment capital. Okay? So there's a lot of money that's going into these new startups. There's a lot of money finding itself to ag tech. All right, so quick 101 on plant factories. So the different terminologies that I'm going to use over the next few minutes. One, the vertical farming is basically growing layer on layer. They can be stacked, okay? And they could use any one of these approaches. So they could use soil within their vertical farms, or they could use soil-less technologies or approaches. So hydroponics, basically using nutrient mix, water-based. Aeroponics, just using air and cooling the roots of the plant to grow. Aquaponics, which is a closed loop system whereby it's still water and fish in a closed loop system. So these are approaches that are soilless. So I'll talk over the next few minutes about some of these technologies that are out there and how production benefits are being captured. This is one of the companies. So when I talked about vertical farms, so this is a Singaporean company started by not a farmer, an engineer, a mechanical engineer, Jack Ng. He's the guy over there. He started this farm about 5 years ago. seed funded by the Singapore government, and all he did was he tried to look at, how do we grow plants or leafy vegetables in vertical capacity, because in Singapore there is no land, there is no agri per se, so all they've got is space to go vertical, and so that's what he did. He tried to create these A-frames. So these are about 32 meters in height. He's got a hydraulic pump which basically pumps the energy through the system, and each of these trays get adequate sunlight all through the day. So through these little innovations, they've been able to look at productivity. So 95% less water, 10% more yield, 75% less input, 5 cents of electricity to produce 1 kilogram of vegetables. Now, a few slides back, I showed you the Association of Vertical Farming and what they claim to be the benefits of vertical farming, for instance. And so let's put some of that to the test. And again, these are stats and figures given to us by the relevant company. So take it with a pinch of salt. 95% less water. Peel's got a water issue. Right across Australia, there are water issues. How do we use some of these technologies? Can we bring some of these technologies over here and try and use less energy but have more yield? Can we do that? Keep an open mind and think through some of this. So these plant factories, now, are they really just a fad or are they really growing? If you look at Japan, in 2009, there were a mere 39 plant factories. Okay? These plant factories are basically where you're growing your plants in an indoor system or a vertical farm system, but basically where you're trying to control a lot of the variables. In about 6 years, that number of plant factories grew from 39 to 191. Okay? So some of us will think, yeah, great, new technologies must be expensive. Is it going to be economic as far as investing? What are the economies of scale? So one thing to take away from this trend is that R&D continues to take place at a rapid pace, which is why you're seeing a lot of these plant factories start to take shape. Okay? Now, you speak to most plant factories across the world, the first product they invest in is lettuce, because the ROI tends to be much higher, the investment and the cost of capital is much lower. So a lot of them producing lettuce now and trying to look at how they can be competitive and what their competitive advantage against the competitors might be. So a lot of them investing in lettuce. We're looking at the business models and the technology. So needless to say, when you look at the business models themselves, technology, distribution, marketing, all of this tends to be key aspects when you're planning a business model around a plant factory. Okay? There's still challenges when it comes to infrastructure, cost of capital, energy, supply chain, prices, trying to find your market, because that's key. It's one thing to say, I want to grow X, but not have a market for it. It's going to be a waste of effort and energy. So let's look at one aspect of energy, because energy is a key cost item on many of these plant factories' books. So let's look at how energy, R&D and energy efficiency is improved. So we look at one particular aspect of energy right now. If you look at the plant factories, so if you look at control environment ag, a lot of them using LEDs at the moment. Okay? So why LEDs? Because they want to control the energy and the wavelengths, because that helps the plant production activity. So this is basically around red light, blue light, far red light, and white light. And depending on how you control the wavelength of the light, you can alter the shape and the characteristics of these products. So while there's a lot of R&D going on at the moment just to make sure that the economies of scale can be achieved to produce these products in the next 5 years, in the next 5 or 7 years, what you're going to increasingly see is consumer-driven production methods. And I say this because, so let's take, for example, tomatoes. If we can start growing tomatoes at capacity, at being energy efficient, being water efficient, in a hydroponics plant in the Peel or in Singapore or in Dubai or in the US, what's the competitive advantage for the export market, or what's the competitive advantage? One, it's around the technology, but it's also in terms of altering the shape and the characteristics. Okay? So do you want a tomato that's much sweeter? Do you want a tomato that's less sweeter? How bitter do you want the tomato? How big do you want the tomato? We can control, or at least companies tell me, that we can control the shape and the characteristics depending on the wavelength. Okay? So what they call is the light recipe is the key competitive advantage, or the key differentiator for all of these companies going forward. Okay? So let's look at the cost of LED. This was an article, part of an article that the US Department of Energy had put up. So just look at the price of the LED bulb, okay? In about 2009, 2010, when companies were just starting to invest in vertical farming, indoor farming, the price of an LED bulb was about $80 a bulb, okay? Fast forward to 2016, 2017, it's probably under $10, okay, for an LED bulb. Look at the efficiency. The efficiency's gone the other way, okay? In 2010, you're probably getting 20,000 hours. Now you're getting in excess of 40, 50,000 hours per LED bulb. So the R&D continues to happen at a very rapid pace, okay? And this is why you see the surge in the number of plant factories in a place like Japan. All right, so talking about Japan, we can't talk about Japan and not talk about the Japanese companies. Let's see what the Japanese companies are up to. So this is Sony's plant in the Miyagi Prefecture in Japan. 2,500 square meters fitted with about 17,500 LED lights. These are the numbers that they have provided to the market, so take it with a pinch of salt. 40% energy consumption compared to traditional farms. 99% reduction in water capacity. 100-fold improvement in terms of lettuce production per day. Okay, now as I said, everyone's going to lettuce because they want to prove the technology and they want to make sure that they can economize and scale up once the technology is proven. Okay? Food losses, which you would traditionally have at your farm gate, where either through use of increased pesticides or pests or whatever else, you have a high amount of food loss. In these factories, they've reduced the food losses to about 10%. Okay? So this is Sony. Panasonic. Panasonic is a company that we're working with in Singapore, and they've been going through the R&D process for a few years now. They started in 2013 with a lot size of 60 or 65 square meters. In about a year, they've grown that facility to about 600 square meters. They've invested in a facility across the border in Malaysia, and that's double the size of what they have in Singapore. So what did Panasonic tell me? They're growing 30 different varieties at the moment, okay? 30 different varieties being grown in Singapore. Production time, lettuce production takes about 30 days, okay? They're looking at shelf life because what they want to do is, so these companies, Sony and Panasonic, they're not just in for the technology. They're in because they actually want to even distribute and supply to the end consumer. So that's the game for the likes of Sony and Panasonic. Panasonic have finally launched their salads in the Singapore market. Again, if you want to think about, okay, if technology is expensive, this must be really expensive technology, lots of investment going in, their price premium in the marketplace is about $1. Okay, compared to what comes in from places like Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So 2 weeks ago, I was at Panasonic, and they got me to taste the tomatoes. I must say that the orange tomato was much better tasting than the red one. So I don't know why, but they're looking at the science to control taste, to control firmness, to control appearances and all of that. I mean, look at all these 4 tomatoes. They're all pretty much the same size, the same shape, the same designs, the same sort of outputs, okay? Because all of this is being controlled, and which is why they call it controlled environment ag. Okay, quick reality check, okay? Vertical farming, indoor farming, probably not the panacea, okay? So please don't take it away from here saying that this is changing the world. It is changing the world, but there's a lot more happening. So these are 2 companies, US companies, commercially producers in the US. They were supplying, this company, Farmers Blend, farmed here, supplying to 200 stores in Chicago, Portponics supplying to Atlanta in Georgia. In 2016, they both shut down their operations. Why? Because this company, Portponics, had a $25 million offtake agreement with one of the distributors in the US. But why did they shut down? The guy who started this company was a tech guy from Emory University. He said, if this $25 million of an offtake agreement for what I'm doing right now, there's got to be much more money in terms of the technology that I can produce. So that's why I'm shutting down my plant and going back to focus on technology. So these guys have reinvested into new ag tech technologies, and that's where their focus is. Paul Hartage, the guy who started Farmed here, an architect, not a grower, and the reason he shut down his plant, he says, is because of the investment that found the company didn't allow it to do innovative work, okay? So at one point, Portponics and Farmed here were looking at a merger. The board decided that the merger was not going to be lucrative enough, so they decided to not go ahead with the merger. And so Paul, who was the co-founder of Farmed here, decided to shut down the plant, and now he's reinvested in looking at other ag tech, okay? So it's not that the technology is not there. The technology is there, but as I say, R&D continues to gather pace. and these guys are looking at new technologies to drive more profits, okay, and more value. All right. Quickly, the point I want to make, if there is a myth around the room or around anywhere to say that urban farming, vertical farming, indoor farming is going to hollow out the grower, the farmer, the producer, that's a myth, okay? Because if anything, what we're seeing over here is that agribusiness, the farmers, the producers still continue to be central. All that's happening is we're putting support systems around it, mainly with technology, with manufacturing, with processing, with R&D, with high-skilled labor, with architecture and all of that, okay? So that's a quick point that I want to make. Now, I've got 5 minutes and I want to get to the Peel food zone because that's why we're all here. Comparative advantage, lots of reasons, okay? Quick insight, if you look at the Singapore market where I'm based in, there are 3 countries that are able to charge a price premium for its products. US, Japan, and Australia. So products coming out of Australia can fetch a price premium, are fetching a price premium in a market like Singapore. And that goes for many parts of Asia, even the Middle East, okay? What we've done is we started off a consumer study looking at the 6 markets where WA products are being sold and where WA products achieve a premium, okay? We've picked about 7 products because we believe if we have to make the food zone competitive, there's no point in looking at producing more lettuce, because if that's going to be produced in Singapore and Malaysia and Vietnam more competitively, there's no point in trying to do the same in the Peel zone. So we looked at high value products, looking at where the technology is at, looking where the market is, and looking at the business models around this. So what we found in the 4 markets, the data is just starting to come in, so a lot of these calculations are just fresh, okay? I just want to take you through what's at the bottom of the screen because I'll go through this in a couple of minutes. Australia and Singapore, price competitive markets. Look at Malaysia. The top 3 factors for buying Australian products that are coming out from these urban farms: nutritional value, organic production, certification. Price, not even a factor, okay? We had about 6 or 7 different factors, okay? Across all the different markets, we're still seeing nutritional value and certification as a key factor in the consumer's mind when they're looking to buy these products. Okay, very quickly, weekly consumption of these products across these markets. We looked at Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong. We're still waiting on data to come in from the United Arab Emirates and Thailand. But just from the initial data that we've got, if you look at consumption levels, 500 grams, over 500 grams per week, if you look at the countries that stack up above the 40% line, immediately you find tomato, spinach to be the key products, over 50% consumption across the different markets. If you look at the projections into the future, these are consumers saying what they're going to be consuming more. So we're saying at least 20% increase. You look at above 40%, you see mushroom, tomato, spinach, strawberry. Okay? So if you're thinking what product is going to sell, then of the 7 that we've put up, these are some of the products to think. Kale, we talked about kale earlier. Interestingly enough, not very high consumers of kale yet, okay, across even Australia. But Singapore, Malaysia, they're up there. Hong Kong, which was a surprise for us, not huge consumers of kale. But if you look at growth, Australia, or the Australian consumer is saying that they're going to grow their consumption of kale. Okay? Singapore and Malaysia continue to consume a lot. Hong Kong is probably growing, but at a much lower pace. Okay, so who's willing to pay the premium? Including us Aussies, we're willing, 50% of the consumer sample said they were willing to pay at least 10% or more for products that were grown in Australia. Malaysia, again, surprise to us, off the charts in terms of the number of consumers willing to pay a premium. Okay, so across these 4 markets, price sensitive, but still the opportunity exists. Okay, so look at the 6 products that I've curated over here: rocket, kale, radish, strawberries, capsicum, and tomatoes. These are not pictures picked from Google. These are pictures from my local supermarket in Singapore. Okay, so if you're going to the supermarket, I went to the local Woolies yesterday to check out prices. Trust tomatoes in the local supermarket, about $6, $6 to $7 a kilo. Kale probably much more reasonable. Strawberries I picked up last evening, about $7 for 500 grams. But this is what I'm paying at the local supermarket in Singapore. So tomatoes, I'm paying 3 times the price premium what's being produced over here. Kale, on a US product, we're paying double. Strawberries, these are strawberries that come out from Korea, and they're getting 45 bucks a kilo, while I'm paying 15 bucks over here in the local supermarket. So when you think about product, you think about market, you think about technology, all of them have to align. And there is a market out there that we need to capture, okay? So if these are the price premiums that the consumer is willing to pay in these countries, okay, what's our challenge? Okay, now let me put it into context. Can we conceive of a Singapore peel food zone? Basically saying, can we produce a large amount of quantity just to service the Singapore market? Okay, let's just look at the numbers. Singapore's leafy, non-leafy vegetable consumption, okay, is about 500,000 tons a year. I was looking at the stats last night. What I found out as well was that fruit consumption was about 400,000 tons a year. So that's a per capita consumption of about 150 kilos per person. What are we producing and what are we exporting, WA as a whole, to the ASEAN region? Okay, so this is to about 7 or 8 countries. We're producing and exporting 34,000 tons. 34,000 tons compared to Singapore alone, the capacity for consumption, which is about 500,000 tons in leafy and 400,000 tons in fruit. There's a huge market potential, okay? The challenge we've got is we've got to scale up our operations. We've got to become more productive. We have to invest in technology because whether we like it or not, it's not an option any longer. If places like Singapore can start to produce products in plant factories, Japan's doing the same, the Dutch are doing the same, the French are doing the same, we can't afford to, not do the technology bit, okay? So that's something we got to think about, and this is just in terms of production. We haven't even started to think about the value add, okay? As Professor Hughes mentioned earlier, it's not just about the product. You got to tell a story. What's the story? What's the peel story? What does the consumer in Singapore or China want to know about peel? Okay? Can we tell a story around it? This is Taiwanese companies, Taiwanese plant factories producing bean sprouts and broccoli, and what they're doing is they're actually using it in cosmetic products. Okay? That's the value add that they're doing. In 2014, when Murdoch University ran the second Murdoch Commission on food security, we had about 10 or 12 commissioners from the Asia-Pacific region. The Japanese commissioner, Kazuhito, always told me, Chris, the Aussies have to learn from the Japanese. I said, why? He said, you guys export $30 billion worth of wheat to Japan. What we do is we value add, we create noodles and we create all sorts of products, and we sell it for $90 billion into the export market. Okay? So the value add has to start happening. We've got to think about the processing, we've got to think about the distribution, we've got to think about the marketing. Okay? The marketing, telling the story is very important. The production in a few years is going to become a given. Okay? How do you build on that? All right? So that's something we've got to think about. So in conclusion, the peel food zone is happening. We've got the government backing. The work is underway. Now it's time to get the tech producers, the technology here. We need to think about how do we scale up our farms. We need to think about the market opportunity. Again, all of this might not be just a peel food zone opportunity. It's an opportunity for the entire state. It's an opportunity for the entire country. But the opportunity is out there and we've got to take advantage of it. All right? So the couple of takeaways. Technology is out there. We've got to use it. The peel food zone is an opportunity. We've got the right ingredients in place. We've got the government backing. We've got the community in place. We have to start making tracks in our way. Okay? And for anyone who thinks that urban farming, indoor farming is going to hollow out the farmer, nope, it's not going to do that. If anything, it's going to be adding more support systems with technology, with manufacturing, with R&D, with skill labor. That's an opportunity for us in the community over here because that's something is very close to our heart, making sure the community comes with us. Okay? So this is an opportunity. Think about it. I'm happy to take any questions at the end. But again, thank you very much to Peel Development Commission and the Department of Ag and Food for having me over here. Thank you very much.